Dear listeners, before starting the story, I ask you to subscribe to the channel under this video. Your subscription motivates me to make quality content for you. I also ask you to share your opinion about the story in the comments, that's all. Enjoy listening. Part 1. The city of Seattle has always been a place of contrasts. Rain and sunshine, mountains and sea, technology and nature. It's a city where people come to reinvent themselves, to start fresh amidst the evergreen forests and the hustle of tech giants. For Jack and Susan Thompson, it was supposed to be a place of new beginnings, a sanctuary after years of struggle and hardship. Jack, a software engineer at a prominent tech company, and Susan, a talented artist, had moved to Seattle after Jack secured a lucrative job offer. They were both in their early 40s, hoping to rekindle their marriage and build a better future for themselves and their teenage daughter, Emily. The move had been Susan's idea, a chance to leave behind the stress and monotony of their previous life in a small town in Ohio. Jack loved his job. The innovative atmosphere at his company invigorated him, and the dynamic environment was a welcome change from his previous positions. He often found himself working late, driven by the excitement of the projects and the camaraderie of his colleagues. Susan, on the other hand, struggled to find her place in the new city. She missed the familiarity of their old home and found it difficult to break into the local art scene. Despite Jack's encouragement, she felt increasingly isolated. As the months passed, the cracks in their marriage, which they had hoped to mend with the move, began to widen. Jack's long hours at work left Susan feeling neglected and alone. She began to seek solace in the company of others, frequenting art galleries and coffee shops where she hoped to find inspiration and connection. It was during one of these outings that she met David, a charismatic and wealthy art dealer who took a keen interest in her work. David was everything Jack was not: outgoing, spontaneous, and deeply immersed in the art world. He offered Susan the validation and attention she craved, showering her with compliments and promising to help her career. Their friendship quickly developed into something more, a whirlwind affair that Susan justified as a necessary escape from her unsatisfying marriage. Jack was oblivious to Susan's infidelity. He was too preoccupied with his work, too trusting to suspect anything was amiss. He often came home late, exhausted, and went straight to bed, unaware of Susan's secret life. He noticed that she seemed happier, more vibrant, but attributed it to her growing success as an artist. He was proud of her and grateful that she had found a way to thrive in their new city. One rainy evening, Jack arrived home earlier than usual, hoping to surprise Susan with a romantic dinner. He had been feeling guilty about his long hours and wanted to make it up to her. As he opened the front door, he heard voices coming from the living room. He paused, puzzled, and then stepped inside. Susan and David were sitting on the couch, laughing and holding hands. The intimacy between them was undeniable. Jack stood frozen in the doorway, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. When Susan noticed him, her face turned pale, and she quickly pulled her hand away from David's. "Jack, you're home early," she said, her voice trembling. "Who is this?" Jack asked, his voice barely a whisper. David stood up, trying to appear composed. "I'm David, a friend of Susan's. We were just discussing her latest art project." Jack's eyes darted between Susan and David, his heart pounding in his chest. "Is that all you were discussing?" Susan looked away, unable to meet his gaze. "Jack, I can explain." But Jack didn't want to hear any explanations. The betrayal was too raw, too painful. He turned and walked out of the house, the rain mingling with his tears as he tried to comprehend the magnitude of Susan's betrayal. Part 2. Jack spent the night in a cheap motel, unable to face the reality of his shattered marriage. He tossed and turned, memories of happier times with Susan flashing through his mind. They had been high school sweethearts, their love surviving the challenges of college, careers, and raising a child. He couldn't understand how it had come to this, how the woman he loved had turned to another man. The next morning, Jack called in sick to work. He couldn't focus, couldn't think about anything other than Susan's betrayal. He wandered around Seattle, the city's gray skies reflecting his mood. He ended up at a small coffee shop near Pike Place Market, where he sat for hours, nursing a cup of coffee and staring blankly at the bustling crowds outside. Meanwhile, Susan was at home, consumed by guilt and fear. She knew she had made a terrible mistake, but she didn't know how to fix it. David had left shortly after Jack, leaving her alone to face the consequences of her actions. She spent the day in a haze, unable to concentrate on anything. When Jack finally returned home that evening, the tension between them was palpable. They sat in silence for a long time, neither knowing how to begin the conversation that would determine the future of their marriage. "Why, Susan?" Jack finally asked, his voice breaking. "Why did you do it?" Susan looked down at her hands, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know, Jack. I was lonely, and David made me feel alive again. But it was a mistake, and I'm so sorry." Jack shook his head, unable to hide his anger and hurt. "A mistake? This wasn't just a mistake, Susan. This was a betrayal. How am I supposed to trust you again?" Susan reached out to touch his hand, but he pulled away. "I understand if you can't forgive me, Jack, but I want to try to make things right, for us and for Emily." Their daughter, Emily, had been staying with friends for the weekend. Jack dreaded the thought of telling her what had happened, of shattering her world with the news of her mother's infidelity. Over the next few weeks, Jack and Susan tried to repair their marriage. They attended counseling sessions and had long, painful conversations about their relationship. Jack found it difficult to let go of his anger and resentment, while Susan struggled with the guilt and shame of her actions. Emily sensed the tension between her parents, but they kept the details of their struggles hidden from her. They wanted to shield her from the pain, to protect her from the harsh reality of their fractured marriage. But the strain took its toll on all of them, and the once happy family dynamic became strained and uncomfortable. Part 3. One evening, as Jack was leaving work, he received a call from Emily's school. She had been involved in a fight with another student and was being suspended. Jack's heart sank as he drove to the school, knowing that their troubles were starting to affect their daughter. When he arrived, he found Emily sitting in the principal's office, her face tear-streaked and angry. She looked up at him with a mix of defiance and despair. "Emily, what happened?" Jack asked, trying to keep his voice calm. She shrugged, avoiding his gaze. "Some girl was talking about Mom, saying things about her and some guy." Jack's heart ached at the thought of his daughter being dragged into their mess. He knelt down beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "I'm sorry, Emily. I know things have been hard lately, but fighting isn't the answer." Emily finally looked at him, her eyes filled with tears. "Why, Dad? Why is everything falling apart?" Jack pulled her into a hug, feeling the weight of his own pain and the responsibility of trying to hold his family together. "I don't know, sweetheart, but we're going to get through this, I promise." At home, Jack and Susan had a long talk with Emily, explaining as much as they could without revealing the full extent of their problems. They assured her that they both loved her and that they were working to fix things. It was a difficult conversation, but it seemed to help, at least a little. Despite their efforts, the strain on their marriage continued to grow. Jack found it increasingly difficult to trust Susan, and their once strong connection felt irreparably damaged. Susan, too, struggled with her guilt and the realization that she might have destroyed the very thing she cherished most. As the months passed, Jack's resentment festered. He threw himself into his work, staying late at the office and avoiding coming home. Susan tried to focus on her art, but her creativity seemed to have dried up in the wake of the affair. Their conversations became strained and superficial, and the emotional distance between them grew. One evening, Jack was working late again when his colleague, Rachel, stopped by his office. Rachel was a recent hire, a brilliant and driven woman who had quickly become a valued member of the team. She was also empathetic and kind, qualities that Jack found increasingly rare in his professional life. "Hey, Jack, you look like you could use a break," Rachel said, leaning against the doorframe with a friendly smile. "Want to grab a coffee?" Jack hesitated, but then nodded. He needed a distraction, and Rachel's company was a welcome respite from the turmoil at home. They walked to a nearby cafe and talked about work, their shared interests, and the challenges of balancing demanding careers with personal lives. Jack found himself opening up to Rachel in a way he hadn't with anyone else in a long time. He felt a connection with her, a sense of understanding and companionship that had been missing from his life. Over the next few weeks, Jack and Rachel's friendship deepened. They spent more time together, both at work and outside the office. Jack felt a growing attraction to her, and he couldn't help but wonder if she felt the same. The lines between friendship and something more began to blur, and Jack found himself at a crossroads. Part 4. One evening, after a particularly stressful day at work, Jack found himself at Rachel's apartment. They had been working late on a project, and she had invited him over for a drink. Jack knew it was a dangerous situation, but he was drawn to her warmth and understanding. As they sat on her couch, sipping wine, Rachel leaned closer, her eyes searching his. "Jack, are you okay? You seem so lost." Jack looked at her, feeling a surge of emotion. He wanted to tell her everything, to pour out his heart and share the pain he had been carrying. But he hesitated, torn between his loyalty to his family and the growing connection he felt with Rachel. Before he could speak, Rachel gently placed her hand on his. "You don't have to say anything if you're not ready. Just know that I'm here for you." The tenderness in her voice broke through Jack's defenses. He leaned in and kissed her, a desperate need for comfort and escape driving his actions. Rachel responded, and for a moment Jack allowed himself to forget about the pain and betrayal that had consumed his life. The next morning, Jack woke up in Rachel's bed, a wave of guilt crashing over him. He quickly dressed and left, his mind racing with the implications of what he had done. He had become the very thing he despised, unfaithful and deceitful. Part 5. At home, Susan could sense that something had changed. Jack was more distant than ever, and their attempts at reconciliation seemed increasingly futile. She suspected that he had found someone else, but she didn't have the strength to confront him. One evening, as they sat in the living room in silence, Susan finally spoke. "Jack, I know things have been difficult between us, but we need to talk. We can't keep living like this." Jack nodded, feeling a mix of dread and relief. "You're right, Susan. We do need to talk." They spent hours discussing their marriage, the pain of Susan's betrayal, and the growing distance between them. Jack admitted to his feelings for Rachel, and Susan confessed that she had known something was wrong but was too afraid to face it. "I never wanted to hurt you, Jack," Susan said, tears streaming down her face. "I made a terrible mistake, and I regret it every day. But if you can't forgive me, if you can't move past this, then maybe it's time we go our separate ways." Jack felt a deep sadness, but also a sense of clarity. He realized that their marriage had been irreparably damaged by the betrayals on both sides. "Maybe you're right, Susan. Maybe it's time for us to let go." Part 6. The decision to separate was painful, but ultimately necessary. They filed for divorce and began the process of dividing their assets and planning for Emily's future. Emily was devastated by the news, but Jack and Susan did their best to reassure her that they both loved her and would always be there for her. Jack moved into a small apartment downtown, while Susan stayed in their family home with Emily. The transition was difficult for everyone, but there was also a sense of relief in finally acknowledging the reality of their situation. Jack continued to see Rachel, though their relationship was complicated by the guilt and turmoil of his recent divorce. Rachel was understanding and supportive, but Jack found it difficult to fully commit to a new relationship while still healing from the wounds of his marriage. Susan, too, struggled to rebuild her life. She focused on her art and sought solace in the support of friends and family. She regretted the choices she had made, but also knew that staying in a broken marriage would have only caused more pain for everyone involved. Part 7. Months passed, and Jack began to find a new rhythm in his life. He threw himself into his work, finding satisfaction in the challenges and accomplishments of his career. He maintained a cordial relationship with Susan for Emily's sake, and they worked together to ensure their daughter felt loved and supported. One day, as Jack was walking through Pike Place Market, he ran into David. The encounter was awkward, but civil. They exchanged polite greetings, each aware of the other's role in the unraveling of Jack's marriage. "How are you doing, Jack?" David asked, his tone cautious. "I'm managing," Jack replied. "It's been a rough year, but I'm getting through it." David nodded, looking genuinely remorseful. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry for what happened. I never meant to cause so much pain." Jack appreciated the sentiment, but it did little to ease the lingering hurt. "Thanks, David. Take care." As Jack walked away, he felt a mix of emotions: anger, sadness, but also a sense of closure. He knew that moving forward wouldn't be easy, but he was determined to find a way to heal and rebuild his life. Part 8. Over the next few years, Jack and Susan settled into their new lives. They both found new partners and pursued their passions with renewed vigor. Emily graduated from high school and went off to college, leaving both parents proud, but acutely aware of the passage of time. Jack and Rachel's relationship grew stronger, but it was not without its challenges. They navigated the complexities of blending families and dealing with the scars of their past relationships. Despite the difficulties, they found solace and joy in each other, building a life together that was different but fulfilling. Susan, too, found happiness with a new partner who appreciated her creativity and supported her career. She continued to create art, finding new inspiration in the fresh start she had made. Part 9. One rainy evening, similar to the night Jack discovered Susan's affair, he found himself reflecting on the journey he had taken. He sat on the balcony of his apartment, watching the city lights flicker through the rain. The pain of betrayal had left deep scars, but it had also led to growth and change. Jack realized that life was full of unexpected twists and turns. While he wished things had turned out differently, he had come to accept the past and focus on the future. He had learned the importance of forgiveness, of others and himself, and the necessity of moving forward, even when the path was uncertain. In the end, Jack understood that his story, like the city of Seattle, was one of contrasts. It was a tale of love and loss, betrayal and forgiveness, endings and new beginnings. And as the rain fell softly around him, he felt a sense of peace, knowing that he had the strength to weather any storm.